Good morning. It's Saturday, June 18th. It's 9 a.m. in the East and 6 a.m. in the West. I'm Michael Steele, filling in for Ali Velshi. We begin this hour with another week of stunning revelations from the January 6th Select Committee. During a pair of public hearings on Capitol Hill this week, investigators began to share the finer details of their findings. On Monday, the panel showed clips from its interviews of various members of the Trump administration to explore origins of the big lie. One of the key figures that emerged from that hearing was Bill Barr. During his deposition, the former attorney general told the committee that he repeatedly told Trump that there was no credible evidence of significant election fraud.
I made it clear I did not agree with the idea of saying the election was stolen and putting out this stuff, which I told the president was bull. And, I didn't want to be a part of it, and that's one of the reasons that went into me deciding to leave when I did.
But even though a number of his own top administration officials debunked election fraud conspiracies, Trump persisted. In the weeks after the election, he latched on to the idea that Vice President Mike Pence would be able to overturn the results of the election by refusing to certify the Electoral College votes from certain states. That was an illegal plan that was spearheaded by John Eastman, who also played a role in the pressure campaign to get the vice president to delay the certification of the results of the 2020 presidential election. That pressure campaign and intense focus on what the vice president would do on January 6th resulted in the violence that at the Capitol, led by a mob that was chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." And during the hearing on Thursday, Pence's former White House counsel, Greg Jacob, testified live that Eastman was aware that his plan was legally dubious at best.
We had an extended discussion, an hour and a half to 2 hours on January 5th. And when I pressed him on the point, I said, John, if the vice president did what you were asking him to do, we would lose 9-0 in the Supreme Court, wouldn't we? And he initially started it, well, I think maybe you would lose only 7-2. And after some further discussion, acknowledged, well, yeah, you're right, we would lose 9-0.
Joining me now is Jacqueline Alemany. She's a congressional investigations reporter for the Washington Post, and she's also an NBC and MSNBC contributor. Also joining us is NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard. So Jackie, among the things we learned during the hearing on Thursday is that John Eastman sought to be added to a pardons list. I mean, how bad was Thursday's hearing for John Eastman?
That was certainly, I think, the bombshell of the week that John Eastman put in an email to Rudy Giuliani that he was wondering if it was still a possibility for him to get on that pardons list. We also don't really know what the rest of the pardons list entailed. That being said, I think John Eastman is going to continue to be a central character, a co-conspirator, so to speak, going forward for the rest of these hearings. Eastman was key to creating this legal idea, the legal coup, that argued that Vice President Pence had the power to unilaterally overturn the results of the election. But the other part of that we're going to see next week is the part of the plan that then implemented and utilized the states to apply that pressure on state legislatures to submit alternate slates of electors. So there were in order for this plan to be successful, there were two parts to it, and that's what I think we're going to hear a bit about on Tuesday. I'm very curious to see if we actually see more emails from John Eastman, since just last week, a federal judge in California ruled that Eastman had to turn over 400 more emails to the committee, some of which just have been described to us as extremely incriminating and relevant to the committee's investigation right now.
So, Vaughn, clearly these hearings are having an impact, because yesterday former President Trump made an on-camera remarks for the first time since the January 6th committee's hearings began. Let's take a listen to a little bit of what he said.
As to what happened on January 6th, it was a simple protest. It got out of hand. Most people should not be treated the way they're being treated. And if I become president someday, if I decide to do it, I will be looking at them very, very seriously for pardons, very, very seriously.
Savon, you've been following his reactions to these hearings. What has his demeanor been like, and what else did he say during his speech yesterday?
Yeah, you know, these were Donald Trump's first on-camera comments since the first public hearing more than a week ago. And, you know, I think that initially leading up to that first public hearing, we were talking about the defense that Trump would have around him, you know, GOP House leadership, other allies. But really what we've seen over the last week is a lot of silence when it comes to these January 6 hearings because of the evidence in the videos and the photos that have been put forward by this committee. That's damning. I mean, these are his own aides, his own family members out of the West Wing who were there on that pivotal day that are on the record, on camera for everybody to hear. And what you heard was 95 minutes of exasperation by the former president. There was little denial, and that's the issue for him. They're hard claims to deny because they're on camera, and just the number of people that have testified makes it very difficult for him to push back against. You know, there was one denial yesterday in which he said that he did not call the former vice president a wimp. But the issue is that the individual who noted to the committee that Donald Trump called Pence a wimp was his body man, Nick Luna, his personal aide who was in the West Wing listening to that very phone call. And then also, I think I could say a majority of his speech yesterday, Michael, was focused on the former vice president, called him a human conveyor belt, arguing that he did have the right to send it back to the state legislatures. But this is where Donald Trump's arguments really are difficult to mount, because he says he never told Donald Trump to overturn the election. But just 6 months ago in a statement, he literally wrote in his own writing, Donald Trump wrote, quote, he could have overturned the election. And so that's where, for Donald Trump, these committee hearings are so difficult.